Hi everyone, it's me, Tim, and today let's talk about game pitches. Yes, I look like Ernest Hemingway. A friend said I looked like Ernest Hemingway with this beard, so I put on the turtleneck and got the pipe and I'm leaning into it. But let's talk about game pitches for real. So, Wiccafish asks, could you go into more detail about pitching a game? I'm curious as to what the process may look like, as well as the materials you should have, prototypes, storyboards, etc., in order to have a successful pitch. That is a really good question. I should say that over my career, I've done wildly different pitches. And I'll describe some of them that I've done. And obviously, they were successful. In fact, I think a rare thing about my career is if I pitched a product that got picked up and paid for, it always shipped. So I've pitched things that nothing happened on, but usually if I can get them to get to the contract phase, I can usually get signed and delivered. So I think I had good pitches. But let me talk about all the pitches I've done in the last 25 years, maybe 30. Let's start with Fallout. Fallout was strange in that it didn't have a pitch doc. I actually gradually assembled a team over time, and after we were well into making the game, we assembled what we called a vision doc. Actually, we assembled 3 of them to explain it to people outside the group. It's how we explained to the, administration and interplay what we were making. It's what they said, it's how we explained to marketing. It's what we said to press when they came by. Everybody in the group knew what Fallout was, but we found it hard to explain Fallout outside the group. I've talked about the vision doc here on this channel, so you can look that up. And I should point out we made 3 vision docs. There was the unsuccessful first 2 that I made, and then the very successful third one that Chris Taylor wrote. The first real pitch I ever did, where I had to basically convince a publisher, was Troika's first game, Arcanum. Leonard and Jason and I together wrote a design doc. It was over 100 pages. I want to say it was over 150 pages. It was really big. I've got a copy around here somewhere. At one point, we printed and bound them. So I have a printed copy floating around somewhere. We showed that to several different companies. No one was interested. I'm saying we showed it to everyone. Blizzard, Sony, Activision, Westwood, Virgin. Sierra was the one that really wanted to do it. And when we landed the contract with them with just the design doc, there was a term in the contract that in 90 days we had to make a prototype. And if the prototype got approved, then we'd make the whole game. It was interesting because this prototype was more than what I called a prototype in my game stages video. It was more like a playable prototype that was also a beautiful corner, because we did a lot of the art. We had a person, we had a building, we had some vegetation, we showed time of day with dynamic shadows. I don't think the dynamic shadows made it in there, but it was a pretty cool working prototype. And it got us past that 90-day mark, and we got approved for the whole thing, and Arcanum shipped 3 years later. For Temple and Vampire, I'm going to just breeze over these because those weren't original IP. We were approached by, in this case, Atari for Temple and Activision for Vampire to do those. Everything was done verbally. They approached us, so we didn't have a pitch, we didn't have a design document, we didn't have a prototype. We did everything verbally, contracts were signed, we were off and running. So the next real pitch I did was at Carbine. You can go look at the Wildstar video, but when the original design team was let go, I was given 90 days to make a new design. And that included classes, which we had never had a class before, and which is one of the sticky points that NCSoft, the parent company of Carbine, they were like, we want to see classes. 90 days is not a long time to come up with a setting, system mechanics, not all system mechanics, but enough that you could explain all. We ended up with 9 classes. We had to explain them all in terms of having varying system mechanics. We did it. We came up with the 9 classes. One of them was entirely done by Art, the Spellslinger. It was an artist's idea. He did the concept art. I loved it. He actually explained some of the things he wanted to do, so we invented system mechanics to support that. In fact, the classes we showed were very similar to the classes that shipped. Some of the big differences were like the healer was massively changed. And the setting was changed. The original setting for Wildstar was a planet that was at the center of a multiverse, and all the different multiverses were bursting onto the planet. So you had wildly different things that were going on there. One of the execs at NCSoft, Jeff Strain, actually correctly pointed out to us that a game that can have anything in it really doesn't have a setting. So we went back and we changed the setting. The next, I was involved in other pitches after that, but like South Park was already pitched. Tyranny got pitched. I was involved in designing Pillars, but not in a main capacity. And also it was interesting, Pillars was pitched to a Kickstarter community. So we pitched the base game, and then when we blew past the amount we asked for, we had to invent stretch goals as we went along, and those are stretch goals for things we wanted to put in the game. So that was interesting and probably unlike any pitch you're going to do. So I would say the next pitch that I did was for the Outer Worlds. The elevator pitch, the Fallout meets Firefly, was already decided on. So Leonard and I basically made a design doc, which was setting, system mechanics, and story. And when we wanted to show it to a publisher, because when we first did it, we were told there isn't going to be a publisher. Obsidian was going to self-fund it. That disappeared within, I want to say that didn't last 30 days. I know it didn't last 60. Suddenly we were told we have to pitch it. So we ended up making a pitch deck, in PowerPoint. We had lots of stuff in that pitch deck about what the game was going to be like, and it had art examples. We didn't even have concept artists on staff at that point. So the art was other people's art, not our art. But it was in the style that we had decided we kind of wanted to go with. And we showed it to everybody. I don't even remember who we showed it to. I remember Microsoft coming down and saying no. And I remember Sony brought a ton of people and they asked really good questions. And I remember they had a system designer and a programmer who both started asking me questions, and we went to lunch and they just kept asking questions. And I really thought Sony was going to go for it. And then they decided no. And then what ended up happening was Take-Two was starting up a new company, private division, and they wanted to do it. So we ended up getting it with a design doc and a pitch deck. So what you're probably interested in knowing now is what was common to all of those design docs, the pitch deck, what was in there that got people interested in what we were doing. Well, I've already talked about what's in a design doc and how it should, spell out the story and the setting and the system mechanics. But pitches themselves, I think all pitches have to include 3 more things in it if you don't have a design doc. And you should have some kind of design doc to show them, but you're not really selling the design doc. You're like, here, take this with you if you want to read it. The pitch itself consists usually of the elevator pitch, which I've said is you should be able to describe your game in a sentence or two. And that sentence or two should give anybody hearing it a really good idea of what your game is and be evocative so they want to know more. So like Fallout's elevator pitch would have been a post-apocalyptic wasteland in a world that in a future that the 50s thought would come to pass. And as I said, the Outer Worlds elevator pitch was, you know, Fallout meets Firefly or Fallout in space. The second thing that your pitch should include is what makes it cool or special or different. And everybody thinks their stuff is. Oops. So I'm wiggling the camera. I'm getting excited. What you have to do is you have to convey what's cool, special, or different about your game in a way that will make the publisher believe it. You're already convinced. You don't need to convince yourself. You need to convince them. And what that means is you should be able to point to system mechanics that you've never seen in any other game. You should be able to point to a setting that is unusual that you haven't seen in any other game out there. You should be able to say something you're doing that's different, that they haven't seen before. But if it's too different, they'll get scared. So usually what you do is you say, imagine this with a twist. Arcanum was, imagine Lord of the Rings going through an industrial revolution. It makes them go, okay, Lord of the Rings, I get that. I'm comfortable. That's sellable. We can sell that. Ooh, this industrial revolution is interesting. What does that mean? And then they ask questions that you answer. So if you can't get the first one, the elevator pitch should hook them, and that cool, special, different thing should reel them in. And then the final clincher on this is, why should you be the one to make it? Why should you make this game? And usually at that point, if it's early in your career, you say things like, we have a lot of experience with this engine, or we're the only ones we think that can pull off this interesting twist, or we have a lot of people on the team who are experienced with this style of art. Later in your career, you can say things like, well, I'm associated with this style of game, or this is the 4th RPG I've made, and the previous ones have all sold, 4 times what their investment was, or better, or 10 times, or whatever numbers you have to tell them. They've reviewed at this level or higher. Basically, what you're doing is you're selling yourself. Now that they've decided they really want this game, you need to make sure that you're the one who's going to make it for them. And that's why what I love about saying that there's always a twist, and what's cool and special and different, is it's usually something unique enough and different enough that they're going to be convinced that somebody who invented that thing is going to have to create it. For Outer Worlds, the Fallout meets Firefly was an interesting pitch, and the fact that we added, we talked about things like flaws, and I'm like, you may wonder why someone would want to make a character that's flawed. Let me talk about Joseph Campbell and his theory of, the hero's journey. So we talked about things like that, and that made them curious, and also it was different enough that they're like, well, I want to see if they can pull it off. I think if you have those three things in your pitch to them, whether it's a verbal one, whether you have a PowerPoint, I think PowerPoints help. They like something to look at during the pitch. If you can make a demo, try to make a pretty one. Making a gray box prototype isn't something you're really going to sell a publisher on, but if you could make part of your beautiful corner and show them that and say, this is what it's going to look like when you walk around the world, great. That's something that will really help. If you can make a demo, a real demo, even if it's a small one, that demonstrates some stuff about your game, the setting, whatever that cool feature is, if you can demonstrate it, even better. These are things that make the potential publisher interested. They start imagining what more stuff is going to be like, and curious about having you do it. So I think if you can do all those things, you'll have a successful pitch. So, Wiccafish, I hope this answers your question.